What's up guys, Belamy Prime here, and in today's video we're just going to be talking about a few things that you guys should be doing each day in Archeage Unchained to make sure you don't fall behind and make sure that you set yourself up to be as competitive as possible with your gear. Now, this video will not cover all the content you could be doing each day to pump out all the value possible. Instead, I'm just going to be talking about a couple things that I myself will be trying to get done on my Archeage Unchained journey so that I can be as strong as possible without running multiple accounts or doing any other shit like that. So the first thing I'm going to talk about today is going to be one of the first things you do in Archeage Unchained because it becomes available at around level 30 I believe, and that is the Crimson Rift and the Grimghast Rifts. Now, I believe these quests become available at level 30, but correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe that's changed. It used to be 30, I have no reason to believe it changed. But unless they change in 6.0, they will reward you with Honor and Infusion supply kits, which will both be very useful once you hit max level. The Crimson Rift begins at 1200 hours in-game, and the Grimghast Rift begins at just a little bit after 2400 hours in-game. If you are the Haranya faction, you'll be doing these quests in the Unistir zone, and for Nuians, you'll be doing this in Cinderstone. Early on, these quests will require a raid of people to complete it, so keep an eye out for people forming groups of CR and GR. Once you're above level 30. I suggest doing these every single day as the honor is very nice, and obviously the infusions are going to be very helpful whether you're doing library gear, Hiram, or what have you. So the next thing we're going to be talking about is cargo dailies on the NPC boat. Now this will be new to a lot of players returning to Archeage Unchained because it's not really new, but I know a lot of people will be returning from playing basically not long after launch, so this will be quite new. These dailies require you to be in a family in-game before they become available, but you can acquire a quest to deliver cargo to and from either of the cargo docks in Solus and Two Crowns. All you have to do is purchase the cargo for gold, purchase a captain's protection from the nearby vendor, climb onto the NPC boat when it arrives in your respective dock, interact with the captain on board, and you can safely ride the boat to turn in the quest on the other side. This will reward you with Onyx Archeum Essence, which is the new version of charcoal, which are super important for crafting high-end gear, and most importantly, lunar gems to socket in your endgame gear. You can easily make a nice chunk of gold per day by selling these on the auction house, or save gold when the time comes to making your own lunar gems or gear. Keep in mind, however, that doing the daily safely will cost you around 30 gold, and players will not be chasing Onyx Archeum for at least a short while after launch. So unless Onyx is already selling nicely on the auction house, or you need the Onyx yourself, I don't suggest doing these dailies until the demand is there. Now the next one is one of the biggest ones we'll be talking about today because it covers a lot of different things. But you want to be queuing into as many instanced raids as possible. Now for a lot of returning players, they won't really be sure what this is, but essentially in this version of Archeage, we have a number of raids that pop up daily that we can queue into for a number of different rewards. Some are PvE, some are PvP. Now, the first one is Halcyona. This is a world PvP instance based on the old Halcy War that becomes available 2 times per day for about an hour. You can easily do this Halcyona instance twice during this period, which will leave you at your entry cap of 2, so you can only do 2 of them per day. Competing in this instance will reward you with a varying amount of honor and infusion supply kits, depending on the placing of your faction. Not only is this instance a lot of fun for PvP players, but for those of you who aren't interested in PvP, you can easily enter and fool around for the duration and get your rewards. A lot of people do it on live servers right now, it won't be anything new. But don't be surprised if people get upset at you for being AFK and not helping, especially on Archeage Unchained, where I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in PvPing. The next instance is the Fall of Hiram City. This is a PvE style instance that requires you to escort refugees to safety while defending them from a number of dangers and supplying them with resources in the area. I won't go into detail about the instance itself, but like Halcy, you'll be able to queue into it throughout the day for a small duration. Generally, you'll get a 20-man pug raid, but you're actually able to queue with a maximum team of 10 to guarantee that at least half your raid will be somewhat competent if you don't have faith in a pug raid. Early on in Archeage Unchained, this instance might be tough to complete fully for the max rewards, but regardless, you will come out the other side with a bit of honor and some infusions for your Hiram gear, so regardless, it's nice. The other instance we'll talk about is the Red Dragon raid. For those of you who don't know, the Red Dragon, which used to be an old world boss, or one of the toughest bosses in the game, for those of you who don't know, it's been made into an instant style raid that becomes available throughout the day, much like Halcyona and Fall of Hiram City. A number of people have asked me about the Red Dragon instance, but it's unlikely people will queue into this early due to its difficulty when players are under-geared. In time, players will begin to have enough gear to queue into the dungeon, but it may take a fair while before pug raids are able to consistently kill the dragon and get their rewards. I suggest ignoring this instance until you have a reasonable gear score and the general populace is able. The next big thing we'll talk about is Hiram dailies. I've spoken at length in other videos about the importance of Hiram dailies, and if you wish to learn about that, check out my complete Hiram guide video for all you need to know about Hiram. I'll leave a link in the description. But regardless of what class you play or what build you intend on following, you will have at least one Hiram piece in your build. So dailies is a fast, simple way of getting ahead early on Hiram, especially if you're joining daily raids with up to 100 players running them all together at the same time. The next one we'll talk about today is a bit from left field, but it's something that I've had in the back of my head that might be very useful in Archeage Unchained, and I feel like I wanted to share it. I know a lot of veteran players will probably be thinking about this as well, but Blue Salt Bond quests may potentially be very, very good early on in Archeage Unchained. Now, I'm unsure of how these will function in Archeage Unchained, but if nothing changes between now and 6.0, these may be a great source of gold early for players who are able to get their hands on the mats required. Essentially, they're daily quests that you can pick up at all community centers all over the world at random that simply require you to hand in a varying amount of either lumber, fabric, iron ingots, or leather. The reward for these quests are a flat amount of gold depending on how many mats that specific quest requires, and a blue salt bond. Depending on the economy in the early days, this flat amount of gold may actually be a huge amount, but as we don't have Apex in Archeage Unchained, and the game is going to be very different as a whole from what we know, it's hard to predict whether this amount of gold will be significant or not. But keep this in the back of your mind because there's a solid chance that this could be a sneaky source of gold early on. Not to mention the blue salt bonds that you get as rewards can be exchanged for honor points as well as ironite armor and weapons once you save a few. Now the next thing I want to talk about is less of a daily thing and something that you should just be working on each day to progress to make sure that you get it as soon as possible, and that's to begin the Ynystia Ring quest. Now this might throw a few people off, especially if you know what I'm talking about, but while leveling, pretty much all dungeons are useless as they aren't very good for XP or gear nowadays. But once you hit max level, I suggest doing a single run of GHA or Greater Howling Abyss to acquire the quest starter for the Ynystia Ring from the final boss that will eventually end up being the second best in slot ring for pretty much every class other than tanks. It's quite easy to grind out and it gives amazing stats for any DPS despite it being designed as a healer ring. The only thing that beats this out in stats is the Dream Ring, which is honestly just not worth the time. It's a huge grind for a slightly better version of the Ynystia Ring, and it only lasts for 30 days, at which point you have to grind more dungeons to renew the timer on it, unlike the Ynystia Ring, which has no timer and takes a fraction of the time and effort to acquire. While we're on the topic of dungeons, I want to talk about the Abyssal Library Dungeon. Once players have enough gear to run the library dungeon, you should have no trouble finding a group for some runs. The daily quests to kill each of the bosses reward you with a huge amount of XP, which is super nice while leveling your ancestrals. On top of this, many players will be searching for gear sets that drop from the dungeon to use in their final build. The bosses also drop abyssal enhancers used to synthesize library armor and Noriette jewelry, which is something you'll want to aim for in the end. They also have a chance to drop Sunglow Lunar Gems, which will be a huge chase item early on for the Lunarite you get from breaking those down. Basically, there's a lot of reasons for you to be doing your 3 daily runs of this dungeon if you can find a group capable of doing it. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about today is a bit of a wild card, but we're going to talk about Missong Jar runs. So while we're on the topic of dungeons, another super simple yet overlooked thing for people to farm early on is Missong Jars. The Missong dungeon is a level 53, I believe, or higher dungeon that you can begin to go in solo and farm these jars. Now, what are these jars? They're basically just a little neat thing in the dungeon that, you know, it's literally a jar that you can tab target to, and you can attack it just like a monster, but you'll one-shot it because they have like no HP, and you can loot it. Once you loot it, you get 2 shards. Once you collect 12 shards, you can create like a Miss Song monocle or some shit it's called, and then you can open that for a number of various rewards. And it's super easy and super fast to run 3 runs of Miss Song, collect all the jars in this single route, and then come out the other end with a couple monocles and some good rewards at the end of it. You can do this solo, and it will give a mixture of abyssal shards, abyssal crystals, and sunset portal stones. The abyssal shards can be useful, but generally you'll just vendor them early on for gold. The abyssal crystals will be required for your Unistia ring quest, so this feeds into that quite nicely. And the sunset portal stones you get can be used to acquire gallant mounts, which are just better versions of the base mounts, which are actually really good in some cases, or make scrolls to awaken Miss Song gear into abyssal library gear. It takes very little time for very solid rewards, and it costs no labor. If you're interested in learning about Miss Song jar farming, I can put a quick guide on showing how at a later date, so let me know if you guys are interested in that. But that's pretty much it for this video, guys. I know I've been pretty much MIA for the last almost 2 weeks. I've been super busy with school, but Archeage Unchained is very fast approaching, so I'm going to be pumping out as much Archeage Unchained prep content as possible. I want to talk about what I plan to do and how I plan to get ahead, what gear I'm going for, and I just kind of want to get out as much information to you guys as possible so you guys can be as prepped as possible for what hopefully is going to be a really fun Archeage experience. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. If you're feeling super generous, head over to my Patreon. But as always, guys, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys on Archeage Unchained. Cheers.